All right, good evening, and thank you again for welcoming us back to Strategic Plan 2.0. So tonight we're going to be talking about innovative structures. So just a little bit of recap. When we've talked about innovative programming from our Teaching, Learning, and Technology Department, remember our first presentation was on gifted and talented programming. We talked about our career technical education programs. We've talked about our core and elective programs at the middle school. And so tonight we're going to talk about structures, which really is bringing a lot of those conversations we've talked about in the last presentations to how do we fit that all into a school day. So that's going to be our focus this evening. And so I want to take us back to Strategic Plan 1.0 and our objective or our goal statement for innovative programming. Again, the Huron Valley Schools will develop innovative programs designed to create enrichment, focus on career technical education, and create a learning environment that maximizes instructional minutes to create greater learning opportunities for students. And specifically, Objective 1.2, Huron Valley Schools will implement flexible scheduling and structures designed to maximize learning opportunities for all students. So this is really our objective and our focus for tonight on structures. So have a few members of our team here. Marty Lindberg, you know, our Director of Curriculum Development. Kathleen Miska is one of our teacher leaders, along with Connie Gilbert and Derek Bod. And so they are going to help this evening as we go through innovative structures. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lindberg.
Thank you, John. Actually going to grab the mic. Thanks again. Good evening. So what we wanted to do first is we spent our last presentation and we talked about middle school programming, and so we wanted to make sure we gave you some background about high school so that you had a full understanding of the secondary level. So what you see up here is our current high school programming. For high school students to graduate from Milford or Lakeland, they would need 22 credits to graduate. If you think about that, a student can earn 3 credits a semester. Over 1 year, that's 6 credits a year. Over 4 years is 24 credits, but they would need 22 credits to graduate. And so you see the requirements that we have for our schools. It's based off of the Michigan Merit Curriculum. And so you see the 22 credit hours. What you see there is 18 of those are the grad requirements, and then our district, we also have the 4 elective requirements to equal the 22 credits. We have our schedule, which we'll show you a little bit more when we look at the Bell schedule, but we have 6-hour days, 6 classes per day, and then once a week, whereas if you remember at the middle school level, they had seminar every day. At the high school level, we have seminar once per week. Okay. We also have programming just to be thinking about when it comes to the electives, the different types of programming. We have a lot of core content areas that not only have the required classes, but a lot of electives in that area. We have elective opportunities in other departments, as well as our career and technical focus and our vocational and early college opportunities for students. So you actually saw this slide last time. We just included the middle school with it. And so we just cut the middle school off so that you really could focus on the high school. And one of the things you should notice, the difference between the middle school and the high school, is there weren't a lot of academic elective choices at the middle school level. But when you look at the high school level, you see we do have a plethora of high school electives. And so when you go through each of the departments, you can see there's a lot of choice for students when they're looking to explore in those core areas. And then outside of the academic areas, you take a look at all the different electives that we have across our schools. You can see there is a lot of choice for students spread out in different departments, different opportunities for students to have those choices to gain exposure to different areas of learning. One of the things that we did in our course book at both the middle school and the high school level is we made a real focus on the career pathways and really providing opportunities for students and parents to look at schedules through the lens of a specific pathway. And so the example we have here for you is the arts and communications pathway. And so what we do is we provide students with possibly a 4-year potential schedule. Again, these are all samples, but it gives students that opportunity to kind of look at, hey, if I'm thinking arts and communications is something that as a pathway I would want to consider, here's some opportunities for me over 4 years. These are some classes I may be interested in taking. And then on top of it, here are a lot of different pathway electives that I could consider during those years. Again, these are samples, but it gives students a good opportunity as they look at the different pathways. And then what we have here is just that sample 4-year high school plan. And so when you look at this, this is for a college-bound student who is not a band student or a 4-year music or a 4-year foreign language student. And so when you look at that, you see that there, even though there is choices throughout there, you can see in the senior year, senior English, math elective, science elective, government and an elective for social studies. There are some choices there, but there aren't a lot of choice outside of those 4 elective classes that we have highlighted. And so this is, again, a general student, but if you consider a student who maybe has the requirements being a band student or a world language student for 4 years, you can see the elective choices even lessen from there. So there are a lot of opportunities for students to take different classes. Our concern is the amount of elective opportunities they have in their schedule. And so the middle school structure, I'd mentioned this earlier, just now to go back to middle school, just for you to see the bell schedule for our middle schools. Again, 6 periods per day. Middle school has seminar every day for 28 minutes. And so you see the seminar is at the end of the day. But again, school starts at 8:23, school ends at 3:01. But when you look at that in comparison to the high school, you see school starts significantly earlier. It starts at 7:22 in the morning, and they only have seminar once per week. On Wednesdays, our seminar, and you notice it's attached to their 3rd-hour class, so that's not a separate class. That is a class that they would stay in their 3rd hour for an extended period of time. And then again, for a student in seminar during that time, it gives you that opportunity to go get support from another teacher. It gives you an opportunity to make up a test or quiz. Gives you an opportunity to participate in a club if they're having a meeting or so on during that time. But again, 6 classes. We want to especially note the fact that we start at 7:22 for high school. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Miska.
Thank you. So Marty walked us through what a typical high school schedule and day looks like, so we have a good picture in our minds of what kinds of parameters we're currently working under to offer students as many opportunities as possible for great programming. And we do in Huron Valley, as you can see, offer our students a lot of great opportunities. However, if we want to lean into our objectives for more and more innovative programming, then we're going to have to think about the ways that we can adjust these structures to better meet our vision. And as a reminder, the vision that we went over last time, slightly consolidated here, is that we want to make sure that we're giving students ample choice for a variety of engaging electives and having space for those electives as well within the constraints of their schedule. That we want to meet the needs of all of our students in core instruction through academic supports and our multi-tiered systems of support structures as well. Especially for enrichment as well as intervention, which we know we offer a little bit more of at the high school level, especially in terms of enrichment, than we do currently at the middle school level. And also to create more opportunities for exploration and engagement in the 6 career pathways. Exploration at the middle school level, giving students an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into all 6 pathways, and at the high school level, giving them a chance to really engage in the work of those pathways in a lot of rich kind of apprenticed sort of ways, as you heard during the CTE presentation a few weeks ago. And also as a matter of review from our last meeting, we know that this vision does come with some considerations, and we promised you we'd go into some greater details of these today, which is why we want to remind you of the kind of big scope of some of these. So we know that to meet this vision, we're going to have considerations of applying best practice to our work. We're going to have considerations of logistics in terms of scheduling and staffing that we need to meet. We know we're going to have needs in terms of course development and resources, and that a lot of this eventually funnels back to an increased need for funding in order to be able to meet these objectives. So in order to work toward our vision, we took an opportunity to kind of re-sift through our objective to implement flexible scheduling and structures designed to maximize learning opportunities for all of our HVS students. We sat with those considerations and thought about what structures would best help us live into this vision. And today we have 3 main structures that we want to share with you that could help us meet the objectives of our vision, as well as some kind of add-on structures, so to speak, that can flex within a lot of different ways of looking at student scheduling. These 3 structures that we're going to share with you could work together in a lot of different ways. They're not necessarily here's option 1, option 2, and option 3, but many could be grafted onto one another. And so we can think about how they might work together to give us all of the opportunities that we want for our students. Okay. So without further ado, let's talk about potential structure number 1. One consideration that our team weighed was the start and end time of the school day and moving toward potentially a 2-tiered busing system for secondary and elementary. This would give us a lot of potential opportunities. Currently, we're working on a 3-tiered system where high school, middle school, and elementary bus at separate schedules and separate times. Moving to a system where, say, middle school and high school students rode together and had a similar start time would give us a lot of opportunities to offer and work toward our vision. This might, for example, look like a high school and middle school start time of, say, and I'm just throwing these out hypothetically, 7:45, and a elementary start time of 8:45, an hour in between, to give enough time for buses to refresh and run their second routes. Starting at 7:45 allows high school students to sleep in an additional half hour, which sounds awfully appealing. And elementary starting about a half hour earlier than they currently do means that maybe our elementary students aren't getting home in the dark in the depths of winter and having a little bit more time with their families in the evenings potentially as well. So let's talk about some of those pros and those benefits in a little bit more detail. We know, according to recent research, that later start times for high school students would do better at optimizing those learning opportunities for them. We're seeing a lot of research about teenage sleep and circadian rhythms and showing us that that teenage bodies just don't go to bed when ideally they'd go to bed in order to get up at a high school start time. And so first hour feels pretty sleepy as someone who teaches a first hour. It's a tired time. And we're seeing a lot of districts in our area that are experimenting with this, among them Novi and Ann Arbor, that have successfully moved to a later high school start time. And they're seeing, I think, some success in the impact on their students. An earlier start and release time for elementary students, as I already mentioned, would allow us to get them home with their families a little bit earlier in the evenings. We know that some students, because of the sheer size and time it takes to transport students across our district, aren't getting home until after 5, some maybe even approaching 5:30, just because that's the nature of the beast that we live in here. And lastly here, that starting secondary on the same tier would give us more opportunities of access to innovative programming. It allows us, for example, to share staff more easily across middle and high school levels. As you heard during the CTE presentation, hiring and finding people who have these niche certifications is very difficult. If we can share a whole FTE across 2 buildings instead of trying to hire a 0.4, a 0.6 of a whole-time person, then that makes hopefully staffing our buildings a little bit easier. And being on the same tier then gives us some opportunities to keep their workday kind of within a normal scope. There are, of course, some considerations here as well, that we would then be having middle school students on the same bus as high school students. We've done this before here on Valley. White Lake and Lakeland were on the same tier for a long time, within the last decade and a half or so. But that is a consideration, and we also then have to consider travel time even just between those two. In the case of Lakeland and White Lake, very adjacent buildings, still takes time. So White Lake and Lakeland may not have exactly the same start time, but perhaps the bus would drop students off at Lakeland, have Lakeland start time be 10 minutes before White Lake's start time, so a slightly staggered start, but still within the same tier. This obviously gets a little bit difficult in terms of the geography of our other building locations. White Lake and Lakeland are on the same campus, but Milford does not have a school that's quite that close at hand, and so that staggered start would be a little bit different. We also maybe want to consider an opt-in to bus service. In our COVID and post-COVID spaces, we've seen fewer families taking advantage of busing for a lot of very valid reasons. And so maybe we want to optimize what busing we offer by asking families to opt into that service instead of it just being a blanket kind of starting point. This also maybe causes considerations with access to before and after school care for elementary. Moving that start time, even only by about a half hour, will cause different needs to arise for families either on the front end or the back end of the day. Things that currently work for some families wouldn't with a different start time. This would also perhaps cause continued challenges for staffing transportation. It is challenging for us to get bus drivers as it is, and moving to 2 tiers means we need more bus drivers at each tier than we do with a 3-tiered system. And we also have a consideration for high school athletic contests and what time those actually start at. We don't want students to miss academic time at the high school level. Obviously, if we start a little bit later, then the day ends a little bit later. And so wanting to make sure that the timing of those contests doesn't draw students out of their academic classes any more than is necessary. In terms of cost, this is a fairly limited impact cost compared to some of the other options we'll be talking about. There are impacts to a transportation budget that could be realized in the terms of cost savings, as well as additional costs potentially as well. And this is something that we could potentially, if we chose, start as early as this next school year, obviously with a number of other features needing to be in place for that to be a feasible reality. But it's not something that requires as much, say, professional learning on educators' parts to implement as some of our other options. So that is potential structure number 1. I'm going to turn it over to Derek for potential structure number 2.
So the second piece of our structured discussion tonight has to do with block scheduling, all right? So block scheduling is basically, we run a traditional roughly 60-minute hour each, 60-minute hours each day. This would expend it to 90 minutes each day, all right? So over the course of one day, you would be running 4 classes instead of 6 for 90 minutes, roughly 90 minutes instead of roughly 60 minutes, all right? There are different variations of a block schedule that you can work into the course of a school year this way. The one that we are pretty much talking about tonight would be an AB block schedule, and actually maybe an ABC block schedule. What this means is the following. An AB block schedule would mean you would take 4 classes one day, you would take a different 4 classes the next day. If you add a C block to that, you would be taking 4 classes one day, 4 classes the next day, and then 1 day a week. The districts around us that we know of do it either on a Monday or a Wednesday. The students would meet with all 7 of their hours so that they're meeting with each teacher for a shorter period of time during that week, all right? So they would have 1 day where they meet with everybody, and then they would alternate AB, AB. So that's kind of what an alternating ABC block would look like, all right? Lots of pros and considerations to consider here, as with everything else that we've offered up. For the pros, the first 3 bullet points here have to do with some of the benefits during the school day. For one, students don't have to transition between hour to hour to hour, all right? They would come in the morning, and because you have to only get up and move 4 times instead of 6, some of that continuity that happens during the course does not have to get broken, to have people get up, resettle. That definitely takes time in between hours that could maybe be spent for learning, okay? The second bullet has to do with the continuity during instructional time, during that hour and a half. So during an hour, you can get in X amount of material. but a lot of times you can't extend it beyond. For example, a science teacher doing a science lab. This would allow a science teacher to introduce the material, conduct the lab, and then follow up with reflection. In a given 60-minute period, that may allow the science teacher to introduce the lab and run the lab. Then the whole day goes by, the night, student comes in the next day, concepts are a little hazy again about what they even did the day before, and the follow-up reflection is not maybe that opportunity is not as well spent as it could be if you could run it through the course of the entire day. All right? So those are the kind of things that a continuity in daily instructional time would allow. The third thing is, because you have an hour and a half, things can slow down a little bit. All right? You do have an hour and a half to work with the material that you're working with. You can perhaps during that time provide a short lecture, work on some skills, and then as you do some formative assessment, check and see where students are in the room. That maybe allows for a little bit of time of one-on-one intervention while these students are working on over here. That is something that to pack all that into a 60-minute day would be very, very difficult. So to allow that hour and a half time allows greater flexibility for teachers to be able to spend that time differently than they could during a 60-minute day. The last two bullet points have to do with the impact over the course of the school year and in this course selection for the students. For example, right now we offer 6 courses. The last several different meetings we've had here have talked about electives, CTE, expanding those possibilities. By doing a block schedule, offering 7 courses instead of 6, that's one entire course that a student would be able to take that they can't currently take. So those opportunities that we've been discussing all along play into account here, all right? Also, it says for potential for longer and more frequent seminar blocks. We spent a good amount of time last session talking about what seminar expanded and different seminar could look like for intervention and for support and for enrichment. Connie's going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide as well, but that may allow that time to be spent during this as well and more frequently, okay? So those are some of the pros. Of course, with that comes some considerations. Because you are only now meeting twice a week or in a C block 3 times a week for longer periods of time, but you're not meeting all 5 days, you do not spend as many instructional minutes with your students each week and the students with their teachers. It does reduce down by about 40 minutes or so, roughly. However, keep that in mind, to balance that off, is the pro that they get an entire additional course. So there is more going on there than that. Students are balancing 7 courses instead of 6, so that if a student's course load has expanded by 1 course, but also again that may be offset by the fact that they're not going to that course every single day and the coursework has the time to expand out during that period. So those are some considerations as well. Challenges for students who are absent or if they're struggling with material. There is something to consider with if a student misses a day, they're missing more material. So that is more material that needs to be made up in the meantime. So that is something to consider as well. As we look at this as well, and this is probably the biggest one on here as far as the considerations, none of our staff, as far as I know, has much experience at all with a 90-minute period. All right. So there are many things that these have pros, but our staff needs to learn what those are, what the best practices are. You can't just take what you have done over 60 minutes and cram it into a 90-period time. If you're used to lecturing, no one wants to hear 90 minutes worth of lecturing, and you don't want to give a 90-minute lecture. So there needs to be ways for our staff to understand how to break those 90 minutes up into smaller increments of time, to use that time effectively with students, and that's something that would need to be done for staff across the board. All right. Also, in the same concept, curriculum pacing needs to be rethought, okay? So with that, teachers basically have an idea of what they can do in a 60-minute period and how that would play out over the course of the year, the concepts that need to be covered over that time. When you are thinking about it in terms of A, B, you only have those students 2 to 3 times a week, and I have them now for 90 minutes. How do I arrange that curriculum differently than the way I had it before? You can't just take what you did in 3-4 hours and think you can just cram it into 2 90-minute spaces. It doesn't work that way, so all of that needs to be rethought, and that would be part of the professional development as well, all right? And then the last thing is, with course development needs, as we just talked, students would be getting additional courses. That allows us to create new CT opportunities. That allows us to create new electives, but they have to be created. And so those things need to be developed, and they will also, which leads us to this, come at a cost, all right? The second bullet first, course development costs. As you look at additional resources and materials, those things all cost a little bit of money, all right? So we have to look at those things as well. Also, because you are offering an additional class over the course of the time and you are having now 7 hours instead of 6, that also means that there will be a cost increase for additional teaching staff. So something else to consider. The potential timeline, because professional development and learning would be so important for this, you would need to spend a good year training staff, teaching staff, learning with staff about how block scheduling could be implemented and what it would look like in Huron Valley. And then the following year would be when implementation could happen as soon as 25-26, okay? So that kind of wraps up what block scheduling would look like. And as Kathleen said in the last slide, these are all things that could work in some way together. This is not option 1 or 2 or 3, but just some things to kind of consider as we go. And Connie, it was going to talk a little bit about how seminar could look.
All right, for our third structure that we wanted to dive into, we wanted to bring back the idea of reimagining seminar. This is something that we highlighted last meeting with our middle school programming, but wanted to lift it here again to go in a little more detail of those pros, considerations, costs, and potential timeline. So just as a reminder, at the middle school, students go to seminar every single day for about 25 to 28 minutes. At the high school, they go once a week for 40 minutes. So we could be looking at shifting both the frequency and length of both of these, and not meaning that they would have to look the same at either of the at the levels. As Derek mentioned in the last slide, meaning the frequency could end up being more like twice a week in a block schedule. But the really big thing that we liked about reimagining seminar is really the structure and the purpose of it. So really trying to lean into how can we systemically use that time for our MTSS model, for our multi-tiered systems of support. So if you can think back to maybe the first, I think it was the first presentation where Lena Nemeth talked about the multi-tiered systems of support and that triangle of the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then even flipping that over and having the tier 1 students as well being thought of in that model, the students who might need some enrichment. We're really envisioning that this could be a place where we could meet all of those needs. So for example, the tier 1 plus students could be identified and pulled out during that time and given some additional enrichment. This is where that gifted and talented programming could occur. This is where those groups of students could be given some book clubs at their level or creative writing project and really facilitated by a staff member. This is also where we could then provide real systemic interventions. So again, identified students could be pulled out with a specific program being utilized to help support them. We do have this being piloted throughout the district, but just thinking the systemic nature of this that could happen within a different structure. Then for all students, this also could be an opportunity for things such as service learning projects, or maybe a genius hour, or maybe the rotating career pathway enrichments that students could take throughout the year. And for example, one thing that we really thought could be powerful at the middle school level is the chance to take an elective without committing to it for the entire year. So for example, students who would like to be in the band at the middle school have to commit to that for the entire year so that they can actually become a band and give performances. But there may be students who still have an interest in learning an instrument, but don't want to commit to the whole entire year of that. So maybe this could be an opportunity for them to get that enrichment, maybe just a few times a week. We know some other districts that do this and thought that was a cool opportunity that we could build upon. So overall, that we think there's a lot of pros with reimagining and really systematizing a seminar into that more of the win or what I need model. But of course, there are considerations. especially the need for staff to lead and coordinate these efforts. You know, we have a lot of buildings, and to make this really impactful, we would need someone to help lead and coordinate what does best practice in enrichment look like? What does best practice for our intervention look like? We also would need staff to then lead those enrichments or interventions as well during that time. Other considerations, course curriculum development for the more structured intervention and enrichment. Right now, we do have intervention going on during seminar. I don't want you to think that that is not happening, but we may have a need for more systemic programs for intervention and maybe some resources to help support those. Professional learning for staff on this Reimagine seminar and what it may look like for our classroom teachers as well as support staff. And then really balancing that structured versus unstructured time during this Reimagine seminar, because currently students do use that time to work on homework, or maybe they're working on a group project together, maybe they're just reading or getting help from that student or from a teacher. So we want to just make sure we're considering maybe not every seminar period is structured, that maybe there is still that unstructured time for students to simply work on their coursework during the school day. So of course, there is a cost when considering some of these things, the cost for coordinating, developing, teaching these courses, and also, again, the potential resources we might need to support these other new classes or intervention resources, etc. Potential timeline, we really saw this as needing a whole year of development and professional learning before fully implementing across the whole district, maybe 25, 26. So now we didn't want to not go into some of these other structure considerations that have been lifted throughout our different presentations, and wanted to highlight them again because we see these as additional structures that support our vision. So again, it's not we can only do one of these. Instead, how could these maybe support some of those other structures? The first one being, again, middle school teaming. So the idea, again, of middle school teaming is that a group of students have the same 4 core teachers in order of those hours. Those hours are connected. This really allows extra support for students because that group of teachers can collaborate around supporting those students. They also could potentially use some flexible scheduling within those hours because we're just worried about the 4 of those teachers. They could work together for extended periods of time if they wanted to do a certain project, work together on that. This has been something that Huron Valley has really valued for many years, and we still have middle school teaming going on right now. It's just harder to maintain the 4-person teams when you have declining enrollment. So in some buildings, we have 3-person teams, some we have 4-person teams, but just really valuing it would be nice to be able to provide those core 4-person middle school teams across all our buildings. You heard us mention shared campus programming in a few different spaces, thinking how this can really support our vision by leveraging the scheduling of highly qualified staff, especially in electives. Again, we do share staff right now between middle school and high school, but this could just provide an easier way to support us in doing so, maybe allowing us to hire more full-time teachers instead of part-time teachers. Also, access to facilities, equipment, and resources, such as if we wanted to start middle school exposure to an auto program, if they were on the same campus as one of our high schools that had that, then it would be easier for them to maybe walk over and use those resources. Potentially easier for middle school students to take some advanced coursework. The CTE program, maybe some physical education spaces, our CPA, just easier to share those resources. And also just the sense of community that a shared campus can provide. With the increased opportunities for our high school students to be mentors to our elementary or middle school students, just becomes a little bit simpler just simply by location. So again, those were structures that we felt supported our vision as a whole, but we didn't want to not mention some other structures that we did consider. that really kind of just gave us some hesitation and maybe more some concern as opposed to thinking that they would support really our vision moving forward. The first being 7-period days. Now, while the 7-period day does allow for kids to take more electives, what that does is it shortens every class period. So where Derek was talking about all the pros of block scheduling and the limit of transitions that you would have, or the less amount of transitions you have with block scheduling. 7-period days, you're going to 7 different classes, a lot of different disruptions, and the shortened period of time within those class periods. So some hesitations on that. We considered going to trimesters. So right now we are in semesters in Huron Valley, except for Harbor High School does run on trimesters with 5 class periods. That works well for Harbor because the students can take more classes that way and gain more credits that they may have lost. But for the traditional high schools, we didn't see this as something that really supported our vision. Even though you can take more classes, the continuity of learning was the main concern. So for example, you would be taking a year's worth of like a course like Algebra 1 over two of the trimesters. So that means for Algebra 1, you may have it in first trimester and last trimester, so then you have a whole trimester where you're not getting that content. This poses some concerns for our advanced placement courses. So some students who maybe would have their AP class for the first and second trimester, but the AP exam isn't until May, could provide some challenges. And even if you had it in second and third, you might not get to all of the content. So we've seen some districts actually move away from trimesters, so it just gave us some concern about moving towards that. And the last one on here, balanced calendar, thinking about more of a year-round school year. And this could look a lot of different ways. It could look like a 4-day week, and so you get every Friday off. It could look like we used to have in Huron Valley with a 45-15 program, where students go to school 45 days and have 15 days off, and then an extended period of summer. And while this would shorten what we would call the summer slide, it did seem to still have a lot of transitions in and out of learning, and just didn't feel if that continuity of learning would support that throughout the whole year. We also knew that this would have a huge impact on our community and childcare concerns. And so it just at this point seems like a structure of concern as opposed to something that we wanted to move forward with. Now I'm going to turn it over to John to wrap us up.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Connie. So just to summarize, structures that support our mission and vision. Coming back to the district's mission, inspiring and building futures one student at a time, we really wanted to spend some time tonight revisiting what we talked about with gifted and talented programming and our multi-tiered systems of support. We wanted to spend some time tonight talking about structures that supported expanded career technical education programs. And we wanted to spend some time tonight talking about core and elective programs and how that all fits together. So these structures that you see up here, these 5 structures, really felt like these were things that supported that vision. And as the team mentioned, they're not individual and they kind of fit together. So we can decide what makes sense within each one of these structures. But we also wanted to share with the team tonight that it wasn't that we didn't consider other things. There was a lot of thinking and a lot of work that went into this. I want to really thank our teacher leaders, Kathleen and Connie and Derek, that presented tonight. And we have a team in teaching, learning, and technology. They're just a great group that do a lot of really deep thinking, really push on each other as we're having these conversations, and I think coming up with tonight's presentation is just an example of the work that they do and the deep thinking there. We also wanted to just mention that in our last presentation, we talked about giving kids the opportunity to have experiences in all of the different career pathways. Starting that at the elementary, giving students greater experiences in the middle school, and really giving that exploration and those deep learning experiences in the high school. And we really feel like these structures here support that work. So again, going back to Strategic Plan 1.0, coming up with innovative structures, I really want to thank everybody tonight for putting that work together and giving us something to really think about and have some conversations about this evening. So thank you very much for your attention and giving us the opportunity to share.